They didn't text you. They didn't explain anything. Nothing actually happened. And yet you felt something shift, like a quiet pull, like your mind went somewhere on its own. And suddenly you thought of them, not casually, not randomly, but with a strange sense of certainty. And for a moment, you were sure they were thinking about you too. Now, here's the part most people ignore. That feeling didn't come from nowhere. And this is where everything changes. Because in the next few minutes, you're going to understand something most people never do. Not about attraction, not about coincidence, but about how the mind works when emotion and attention overlap. And I need to warn you, because once you understand this, you won't just notice when someone reaches out to you. You'll start noticing why and when they don't, and that changes how you see every connection. Now, think about this for a moment. There's always that one person, not the loudest, not the most present, but the one who somehow stays in your thoughts longer than they should. You don't talk every day, sometimes not even often, but something about them feels unfinished, like a conversation that never fully ended, like something is still open between you. And then it happens. Out of nowhere, you think of them deeply, emotionally, and within minutes, they text, they call, they show up, and it feels like something more than coincidence. If this is already hitting close to home, type 1 in the comments. Not for engagement, but because acknowledging it means you've noticed a pattern most people ignore. Now here's where things start to get interesting, because what you're experiencing is not magic, and it's not some hidden force controlling outcomes either. It's something far more subtle, far more real. It's about attention, memory, and emotional imprint. And this is where people misunderstand everything. They think the law of attraction means you think something and it happens. But what actually happens is much quieter than that. Your brain begins to notice patterns. It prioritizes certain people. It amplifies specific signals. And slowly, your perception changes. Daniel Kahneman explained something similar through how the mind works in two systems. One is fast, emotional, automatic. The other is slow, logical, analytical. And most of the time, this feeling you're experiencing comes from the fast system, the part of your mind that recognizes patterns before you consciously understand them. So when you suddenly feel like someone is about to reach out to you, it's not because you predicted the future. It's because your mind picked up on something your conscious awareness hasn't processed yet. And here's what most people miss. Some people are far more sensitive to these patterns than others. They don't just notice behavior. They feel shifts. They sense when something changes, even before it becomes visible. These people are often called empaths, but not in the usual way people describe it. Not just someone who feels a lot. That's too shallow. An empath processes emotional information differently. They don't just hear words. They register tone, timing, consistency, absence. They notice when a message takes longer than usual, when a response feels slightly off, when attention fades, even a little, and over time, their brain builds a pattern, a map of how someone shows up and how that presence changes. So when that pattern shifts, they feel it instantly, before any message arrives, before any call happens. And this is where the illusion begins. Because when the person finally reaches out, it feels like you attracted it. But what really happened is your mind recognized the build-up before the action occurred. And this is where everything changes. Because once you understand this, you stop asking, will they reach out to me? And you start asking something deeper. What has already changed that makes me feel like they will? And that question reveals everything. But here's what most people never see. This only works when there is a real connection, when there is emotional consistency, when there is a shared pattern, because without that, there is nothing for your mind to recognize, nothing to predict. And this is where people confuse desire with awareness. They think wanting something badly will make it happen. But wanting is not the same as noticing, and your brain knows the difference. This is why sometimes you think about someone constantly and nothing happens. No message, no call, no sign, because there was no pattern being reinforced. Only emotion without feedback. But when there is a real connection, something very specific happens. Your brain stores emotional moments differently. It doesn't categorize them as finished. It keeps them open, like unfinished loops. And unfinished loops always seek closure. So when that person begins thinking about you again, replaying those same moments, their behavior shifts, even slightly, and your mind picks it up before you even realize it. And suddenly you feel it. That quiet pull, that subtle certainty, that sense that something is about to happen, and then it does. But here's what most people miss. Not every signal leads to connection. Sometimes it leads to confusion. And in the next part, we're going to break down something deeper. Why sometimes you feel like someone is thinking about you, but when they finally reach out, it doesn't feel right anymore. And that difference is where most people get it completely wrong. But here's what most people miss. Not every time someone reaches out means the connection is still the same. Sometimes the signal is still there, but the feeling behind it has changed. And this is where everything becomes confusing. Because from the outside, it looks like the same person, same name, same voice, same message, but something feels different, subtle, hard to explain, but unmistakable. And this is the part no one tells you. Your mind doesn't just recognize presence. It recognizes quality of attention. And when that quality changes, the entire connection shifts. Now, pay attention to this. At some point in every connection, there are moments where someone tries to express something real. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. And how you respond in those moments decides everything that comes after. Sometimes you don't even realize what you're doing. You hear them, but you don't fully listen. You respond, but you don't fully acknowledge. You stay present, but not emotionally available. And it feels small, almost harmless. But to someone who processes emotions deeply, it's not small at all. Because they're not reacting to the words. They're reacting to what's missing. The pause that didn't happen, the question that wasn't asked, the feeling that wasn't recognized. And this is where everything starts to change. They don't react immediately. They don't create conflict. They don't demand anything from you. They observe quietly. They begin to notice a pattern, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And the brain is very good at recognizing repetition, especially emotional repetition. So what happens next is almost invisible. They start adjusting, they share less, they explain less, They expect less, not because they stopped caring, but because something inside them no longer feels received. And this is the part most people misunderstand. When someone starts pulling back, it doesn't mean they feel less. It often means they felt too much for too long without being met the same way. And here's where things get deeper. Even in this phase, they still think about you. In fact, sometimes even more than before. But the nature of those thoughts changes. Before, it felt calm, natural, effortless. Now, it feels like questioning. Did they understand me? Was I expecting too much? Did I imagine the connection? And this is where everything changes. Because once the brain starts questioning a connection, it no longer feels safe inside it. And safety is what keeps emotional patterns alive. Without safety, the brain begins to protect itself. It reduces exposure. It limits emotional investment. It slowly disconnects. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that's almost impossible to notice from the outside. And here's the key shift. When they think about you now, it doesn't feel the same. It feels heavier, less certain, less warm, more complicated. And this is where the signal changes. Because earlier, when they thought about you, you could feel it clearly. Now, it becomes distorted. You still feel something, but you don't understand it anymore. And this is the moment most people misinterpret. They think if they reached out, everything must be fine. But that's not always true. Sometimes they reached out because something inside them needed closure, not connection. And this is where everything shifts in a way you don't expect. Because there's another layer, far more complex than emotional dismissal. A layer where the connection doesn't just weaken, it becomes emotionally imbalanced. And when that happens, the person doesn't just question the connection, they start questioning themselves. And that changes everything. In the next part, we're going to go deeper into this. Why sometimes the more someone thinks about you, the more emotionally exhausted they become. And why that leads to something most people never see coming. But here's what most people miss. The more someone thinks about you doesn't always mean the connection is getting stronger. Sometimes it means something inside them is unresolved. And unresolved emotions don't create clarity. They create pressure. Now, pay attention to this. At some point, the connection shifts from natural to something that feels like effort, not visible effort, but internal effort. They start thinking about what to say, how to say it, whether they should say anything at all. And slowly, something begins to build inside them. Not anger, not distance, something quieter, tension. And this is where everything changes. Because once tension enters a connection, it doesn't stay still. It grows. They replay conversations. They analyze your tone. They question their own reactions. And this is the part no one tells you. Their mind starts creating a loop that sounds like this. If I respond this way, will it feel right? If I don't respond, will they notice? If I say what I actually feel, will it matter? And that loop is exhausting. Now here's where it gets deeper. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. They still reply. They still engage. They still show up. But internally, they're carrying weight you can't see. And the brain doesn't hold on to emotional weight forever. At some point, it looks for relief. And this is where the shift happens. Instead of trying to fix the connection, they begin to protect themselves from it. Quietly, Gradually, they stop explaining. They stop trying to be fully understood. They stop expecting you to notice. And this is the moment most people completely miss, because nothing dramatic happens. There's no argument, no clear ending, just a subtle withdrawal. And here's the key insight. Even in this stage, they still think about you, but not in the same way. Before, you were someone they felt connected to. Now, you become someone they feel conflicted about. And conflict changes everything, because the brain doesn't revisit something that creates stress the same way it revisits something that feels safe. So the thoughts change from curiosity to analysis, from connection to evaluation. Why does this feel different now? Why do I feel drained after talking to them? Why am I thinking so much but feeling less? And this is where emotional exhaustion begins. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a slow, almost invisible way, they start feeling tired, not physically, but mentally. And emotional exhaustion is dangerous because it doesn't push people away loudly. It makes them detach quietly. And this is where everything shifts in a way you don't expect. They don't leave immediately. They don't cut things off. They simply stop investing. And once someone stops investing emotionally, the connection begins to fade from the inside out. Now, here's what most people never realize. This is the stage where people say, I don't know what happened. Everything was fine, and then it changed. But it didn't change suddenly. It changed gradually over time through small moments that were never addressed. And this is where the method becomes clearer. That feeling, that sense that someone is thinking about you is strongest when the connection is light, safe, balanced, mutual. But when it becomes heavy, when it starts carrying tension, that signal becomes distorted. You still feel something, but it's no longer clear. And this is the part most people misunderstand. They think the feeling means connection, but sometimes it means the opposite. It means the connection is struggling to stay alive. And this is where things go even deeper, because emotional exhaustion doesn't just come from imbalance. It often comes from something more subtle, something most people don't even realize they're doing. And when that happens, the person doesn't just feel tired. They start losing trust in the connection itself. And once trust begins to fade, everything changes. In the next part, we're going to break down exactly why that happens and why once someone starts losing trust, they don't come back the same. But here's what most people miss. Trust doesn't break in one moment. It fades through small inconsistencies, not big lies, not dramatic actions, just subtle misalignment repeated over time. Now, pay attention to this. There are moments in every connection where what you say and what you do don't fully match. And to most people, that's normal. But to someone who processes emotions deeply, the difference is everything. Because they're not just listening to your words. They're observing your pattern, the timing of your responses, the energy behind your attention, the consistency of your presence. And when something shifts, even slightly, they feel it immediately. Not as a clear thought, but as a subtle discomfort. And this is where everything begins to change. They don't confront you. They don't question you directly. They start noticing quietly. They remember how you used to respond, how you used to show up, how things used to feel. And they compare it to what's happening now. And this is the part no one tells you. The brain is designed to detect inconsistency because inconsistency signals uncertainty. And uncertainty reduces trust. So what happens next is almost automatic. They begin to question the connection. Not loudly, not dramatically, but internally. Did something change? Am I imagining this? Why does this feel different now? And this is where the shift deepens. Because once doubt enters a connection, it doesn't stay in one place. It spreads into every interaction, every memory, every expectation. And suddenly, they're not just feeling the connection, they're analyzing it. And analysis replaces emotion. Now here's where it gets deeper. Even at this stage, they still think about you. But the nature of those thoughts changes again. Before, it was natural. Then it became conflicted. Now it becomes uncertain. Was that moment real? Did they actually mean that? Was I connecting to who they are or who I thought they were? And those questions start disconnecting the emotion from the memory, because the brain struggles to hold on to something it no longer fully trusts. And this is where everything shifts. They stop relying on the connection emotionally, not because they don't care, but because it no longer feels stable. And stability is what keeps emotional patterns alive. Without it, the brain begins to detach, slowly, quietly, without any visible sign. And here's the key moment most people miss. When someone stops trusting a connection, they don't leave immediately. They stay, but differently. They respond, but with less depth. They engage, but with less presence. They think about you, but with less certainty. And this is where the signal begins to fade. Because earlier, when they thought about you, it felt clear. Now, it feels layered, uncertain, unresolved, and eventually, the brain does something very specific. It reduces emotional investment, not out of anger, not out of rejection, but out of protection, because the mind cannot stay connected to something that feels unpredictable. And this is where everything changes. Because once emotional investment decreases, the connection begins to disappear from their inner world. Not instantly, but gradually, until one day, you're no longer someone they think about naturally. You become someone they only think about when something reminds them. And that difference is everything. But here's what most people don't realize. This is not where the process ends. Because once trust fades, something deeper begins to take its place. And that something can completely reshape how someone remembers you. Not just in the present, but in the past as well. And when that happens, the connection doesn't just weaken, it transforms. In the next part, we're going to go even deeper into this. Why sometimes the more someone tries to understand a connection, the more they begin to lose themselves inside it. And why that leads to one of the most powerful turning points in any emotional connection. But here's what most people miss. The moment someone starts trying to understand a connection too much, they slowly stop feeling it. And this is where everything changes. Because there's a point where emotional processing turns into mental overload. Not visible, not dramatic, but deeply exhausting. Now pay attention to this. When someone begins to question a connection repeatedly, their brain doesn't just search for answers. It starts creating scenarios. What did they mean by that? Why did their tone feel different? Why do I feel unsettled after talking to them? And these questions don't disappear. They loop again and again and again. And this is where emotional exhaustion begins to take shape. Not because of one moment, But because of constant mental replay, now here's the deeper layer. When the brain can't find clear answers, it tries to protect itself. And protection often looks like distance, not physical distance, internal distance. They start pulling their attention away. Not all at once, but gradually they stop analyzing every word. They stop searching for meaning in every interaction. They stop trying to figure you out. And this feels like relief at first. But here's what most people don't realize, that relief comes at a cost. Because when someone stops trying to understand you, they also stop trying to stay connected to you. And this is where everything shifts in a way you don't expect. They don't feel as much. Not because the connection didn't matter, but because they've turned down their emotional sensitivity to protect themselves from the confusion. And once that happens, the connection begins to fade from the inside. Now here's the key insight. Even at this stage, they may still reach out. They may still respond. They may still appear present. But internally, they are no longer fully there. And this is the part most people completely miss. Because from the outside, everything looks normal. But on the inside, they've already started leaving. They don't leave suddenly. They leave after they already left emotionally. And this is where everything becomes clear. That feeling you had, that sense that someone was thinking about you, was real. But it belonged to a different phase of the connection. A phase where things were open, clear, mutual. Now, that same connection feels different because the internal experience has changed. And this is where the law of attraction is often misunderstood. It's not about forcing someone to come back. It's about understanding the state in which connection naturally happens. Clarity, emotional safety, consistency. Without those, there is nothing for the mind to recognize and nothing for attention to return to. Now let's shift perspective for a moment. If you're someone who feels these patterns deeply, who notices shifts others ignore, who sometimes thinks of someone right before they reach out, you're not imagining it. Your brain is simply very good at recognizing emotional pattern. But here's the truth you need to understand. Not every thought means connection. Sometimes it's just your mind revisiting something that once mattered. And that's okay. Because clarity is more powerful than attachment. And once you understand that, you stop chasing signals and start recognizing reality. But here's where everything reaches its final point. Because there's one last layer, one that quietly determines whether someone stays connected to you or disappears from your inner world completely. And when this layer breaks, the connection doesn't just fade, it resets. In the next part, we're going to bring everything together. And this is where the realization happens. The moment where you stop asking, will they reach out to me? And start understanding why they ever did in the first place. But here's what most people miss. The final shift doesn't happen when someone stops replying. It happens when they stop feeling you. And this is where everything becomes clear. Because once someone disconnects emotionally, they don't just move on from you. They move on from the version of you that once existed in their mind. Now pay attention to this. Every connection lives in two places. In reality and in perception. Reality is what actually happened. Perception is how it felt. And most of the time, people don't hold on to reality. They hold on to how something felt. So when the feeling changes, the memory changes with it. And this is where the deepest transformation happens. Moments that once felt meaningful start to feel uncertain. Words that once felt genuine start to feel unclear, and slowly the emotional weight of the connection fades. Not because it never mattered, but because it no longer feels the same. And the brain cannot stay attached to something that doesn't feel real anymore. Now, here's the part most people never see coming. When someone reaches this stage, they don't feel the urge to reach out anymore. Not because they're forcing themselves not to, but because the internal signal is gone. The pattern has broken. The emotional loop has closed. And once that loop closes, the mind moves forward, naturally, without resistance. And this is where the entire idea changes. That feeling, that sense that someone is thinking about you, only exists when there is still something open between you, something unresolved, something still alive in the emotional pattern. But once that resolves, the signal disappears, quietly, completely, and this is the truth most people avoid. You don't attract someone by thinking about them. You feel them when there is still a connection active in both minds. And once that connection is no longer mutual, no amount of focus, no amount of desire can recreate it the same way. Now let's slow this down for a moment. If you're someone who lost that feeling, that sense that someone used to reach out, almost on cue, this is not about chasing it back. It's about understanding what changed, not in them, but in the dynamic, because people don't disappear randomly. They leave when the internal experience no longer feels aligned. And if you're someone who still feels everything deeply, who notices subtle shifts, who sometimes pauses because something doesn't feel the same anymore, trust that awareness, not as a prediction, but as information. Because your mind is not trying to control reality. It's trying to understand it. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking, will they reach out to me? And you start asking something far more important. Was the connection still alive? Or was I holding on to the memory of it? And that question gives you something most people never reach. Clarity. Not the kind that feels dramatic. Not the kind that forces action, but the kind that quietly sets you free from confusion. Because real connection doesn't rely on guessing. It doesn't leave you analyzing every signal. It doesn't make you question your own perception. It feels steady, clear, recognizable. And when it's real, you don't need to wait for 3 minutes. You don't need to test it. You don't need to wonder, because the presence is consistent. The attention is mutual, and the connection feels natural. So the next time you feel that sudden thought, that quiet pull towards someone, don't rush to label it as attraction. Pause, observe it, understand it. Ask yourself, does this feel calm, grounded, clear, or does it feel heavy, uncertain, unresolved? Because that difference tells you everything you need to know. Empaths don't need perfection. They don't need constant attention. They need honesty, consistency, emotional safety. And if that's not present, they won't stay long enough to explain why. Because when someone truly feels seen, they don't disappear. They don't confuse you. They don't make you question what's real. They stay, not because they have to, but because the connection itself makes sense. And once you understand that, you stop chasing signals and start recognizing truth. And that is something you don't need to attract. It's something you learn to see.